Hello, my friends. How are you? My name is Mr. Joseph. I present to you various real horror stories. Endless horror. If you are interested in horror stories, subscribe to the channel to receive everything new and tell us where you are from. Thank you. Let's begin.
The five friends had names that echoed their adventurous spirits. Leo, the leader, Maya; the rational historian, Chloe, the creative soul; Noah, the gentle giant; and Liam, the ever-anxious joker. They had grown tired of the city's relentless grind, and Leo had convinced them that a week deep within the ancient Blackwood forest was the perfect detox from work and Wi-Fi. They hiked for miles, the air growing thick and cold, until they found a clearing where the trees seemed to form a perfect unnatural circle. In the center, barely visible beneath a blanket of thorny ivy and rotten leaves, was a hole, a yawning maw of darkness flanked by crumbling stone steps leading down. "It doesn't look safe," said Liam, his voice unnaturally high. "It's incredible," whispered Maya, brushing away grime from the stonework. "This isn't medieval, it's older, pre-Christian, maybe." "It's a miracle it's still standing." "That's not a miracle," Liam muttered. "That's a warning." But Leo was already shining his flashlight down the steps. "Come on," he said, "the ultimate adventure. A story to tell forever." One by one they descended into the earth. The air changed instantly, becoming heavy and cold, carrying a scent of wet soil and something else. Something metallic, like old blood. The stairs led to a massive iron-bound door that stood slightly ajar, as if someone or something had left in a great hurry. Noah pushed the door open with a low groan that vibrated through the stone floor. They stepped into a single vast chamber. The ceiling was lost. In shadows, their flashlight beams carving frantic paths in the darkness. The walls were not made of stone, but of a strange, dark, glassy material that seemed to swallow the light. In the center of the room was a deep pit, its edges smooth and worn. "This is it," Maya said, her voice full of awe. She ran a hand over the wall. "It's obsidian. This is a ritual space, a very, very old one." Chloe set up her camera on a tripod, aiming it at the pit. "Let's get some establishing shots," she said. "This place is dripping with atmosphere." As the day wore on, they set up their sleeping bags and portable lamps, the modern gear looking absurdly out of place in the primordial gloom. Liam's jokes became more forced, his eyes constantly darting towards the door as the sun set outside, plunging their world into absolute blackness. It was during the deepest part of the night that the sounds began. It started as a scratching, a faint skittering from the depths of the pit, like long nails on stone. Noah was the first to hear it, thinking it was an animal. Then it became a whispering, not from one direction but from all around them, a sibilant murmur that seemed to come from the very obsidian walls. It was not a language any of them knew, but they understood its intent. It was hungry, and it was very, very old. Liam shone his light frantically around the room. The beams landed on the walls and they all screamed. The obsidian was no longer solid. It had become semi-transparent, and behind the glass were figures, tall and impossibly thin. Their limbs contorted at painful angles. Their faces were elongated masks of silent agony, and their eyes were pools of infinite blackness. They were pressed against the other side of the glass, countless numbers of them. A forest of the damned straining to get out. The whispering grew louder, coalescing into a single word in their minds. Out the door they had entered through slammed shut with a finality that shook the room. The air grew so cold, their breath plumed in the lamplight. Chloe's camera, which had been recording the whole time, suddenly beeped. She looked at the screen and her blood ran cold. The live feed showed the room from the tripsod's perspective, but in the video, they were not alone. Tall, thin shadows moved between them, their forms flickering and insubstantial. One was leaning over Noah's sleeping form as if smelling him. Leo grabbed a heavy flashlight. "Weapon up," he yelled, his voice cracking. The whispering became a chanting, a low rhythmic drone that vibrated in their bones. The figures in the walls began to move, their hands pressing against the glassy surface, which began to bulge and ripple like the surface of water. A hand made of solid shadow erupted from the pit and wrapped its long fingers around Liam's ankle. It was cold, a cold that burned and spread numbness. He screamed a raw sound of pure terror, as the hand began to pull him towards the pit. Noah reacted, grabbing Liam under the arms and pulling with all his strength. The thing from the pit was strong, impossibly strong. More hands emerged from the darkness, grasping, pulling. Leo ran forward and began beating at the shadowy limb with his flashlight. It shrieked a sound of tearing metal and recoiled, releasing Liam, who scrambled back, sobbing, "We have to get out of here," Maya screamed. She was at the door, pulling at the iron ring, but it would not budge. "It's sealed from the outside," she cried. "Or something is holding it." The lamps began to flicker. The shadows in the room deepened and stretched. The chanting was inside their heads now, a psychic assault that promised endless torment. The obsidian wall near Chloe began to weep, a thick black liquid that smelled of decay. It pooled on the floor and began to take shape, forming into a crude humanoid figure that shambled towards her. Its touch left a corrosive slime on her arm, and she screamed in pain and revulsion. Noah picked up a metal pole from their gear and swung it at the thing. It dissipated into a foul mist, only to reform seconds later. "There, not real," Maya shouted over the din, her historical knowledge surfacing through her panic. "They're psychic manifestations. They feed on fear, but knowing did not help. The things were real enough to hurt them." The room was now full of shifting shadows and whispering figures. The temperature plummeted. The thing in the pit was rising. They could feel a vast presence ascending from the depths, a consciousness of immense age and malice. Leo looked at his friends' faces, pale with terror, illuminated by the dying lamps. He made a decision. He ran not towards the door, but towards the pit. "What are you doing, Leo?" Noah yelled. "It's the source," Leo screamed. "Maybe I can distract it." He shone his light directly down into the abyss. For a split second they all saw it. A colossal heart made of solidified shadow hung in the center of the pit, pulsing with a slow, rhythmless beat. Veins of darkness spread from it into the earth, and with each beat the whispers grew louder, and the things in the room grew more solid. The heart had a single gaping hole in its center, and in that moment Maya understood. She looked at the walls, at the trapped figures. She remembered ancient texts, tales of old gods who slept in the earth and guardians who were bound to them, not as protectors but as food sealed away to sustain a slumbering horror. "They are the lock," she whispered, "and we are the key." The presence focused on Leo. A tendril of pure darkness shot from the pit and pierced his chest. There was no blood, only a light that seemed to be drained from his body. His eyes went wide, then empty, as he was lifted into the air and dragged into the pit, his body dissolving into shadow before it even hit the bottom. His scream was cut off abruptly. The room fell silent. The shadows receded. The figures in the walls were still. The door creaked open. The four friends did not hesitate. They scrambled over each other to get out, bursting into the cold night air and running blindly through the dark forest, thorns tearing at their clothes, not stopping until the sun rose and they collapsed from exhaustion. They were found by rangers days later, dehydrated and babbling incoherently. They never went back. They never spoke of it again. Not really. But sometimes at the edge of sleep they all hear it, the same thing, the faint rhythmic whispering from the earth. And they all have the same nightmare of a door standing ajar deep in the woods, and a voice that is not Leo's calling them from the darkness, promising that a key can be used more than once and that the lock is getting hungry again. The decision was born from the euphoric stupor of graduation, a final act of rebellion before we scattered to the winds of universities and adult obligations. There were 6 of us: Mark, our fearless, impulsive leader; Chloe, his pragmatic and ever-worried girlfriend; Liam, the history buff who saw mystery in every old stone; Sarah, the photographer determined to document our authentic journey; Jake, the jock who was mostly along for the beer and the potential hookup with Sarah; and me, Alex, the quiet one, the writer, the observer. The plan was simple, romantic even. 1 month of pure, unadulterated freedom deep within the Blackwood Forest, a vast and ancient tract of land rumored to have been untouched since the days of the Roman Empire. We were equipped with state-of-the-art tents, dehydrated meals, and a satellite phone for emergencies. We felt invincible. The first few days were idyllic. The air was clean, the silence profound, broken only by our laughter and the crackle of the campfire. But on the fourth day, we found it. It was Liam who spotted the peculiar alignment of moss-covered stones that didn't seem natural. Pushing through a thicket of thorny vines, we stumbled into a clearing, and there it stood, a house. It wasn't just old, it was a fossil. Built from rough-hewn stone and petrified timber, it seemed to grow from the forest floor itself, its windows like vacant, black eyes watching us approach. The roof had long since caved in, and the door hung precariously on a single rusted hinge. Mark, ever the adventurer, immediately declared we had to explore. "Are you insane?" Chloe hissed, her hand gripping his arm. "That thing looks like it'll collapse if we breathe on it wrong." "But imagine what's inside," Liam countered, his eyes alight with a scholar's fervor. "This could predate any recorded settlement in the region. This is history." Jake just shrugged. "Might be cool. Better than another night of cards." Against Chloe's and my quieter protests, the majority ruled. We pushed the creaking door open and stepped into the gloom. The air inside was thick and cold, smelling of damp earth, decay, and something else, something metallic and faintly sour. Sunlight pierced the broken roof in dusty shafts, illuminating a single large room. The furniture, what little remained, was crude, hand-carved from dark wood, but it was the objects on a large central stone table that caught Liam's attention. He rushed over, brushing centuries of dust from their surfaces. There were clay bowls, their surfaces etched with strange swirling symbols that made my head ache to look at. A bronze dagger, its blade green with verdigris but still sharp, lay beside a small, grotesque figurine carved from what looked like bone, depicting a creature with too many limbs and a gaping maw. Liam picked up a coin, rubbing it clean on his shirt. "My God," he whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. This is Roman. But not just any Roman. Early Republic. This is over 2,000 years old." A collective awe fell over us. How did a Roman coin end here, in this deep, forgotten wood, in this strange house? Sarah snapped pictures, the flash illuminating corners that had known only darkness for millennia. It was then that I noticed it, partly concealed by a collapsed shelf, a large, dark opening in the stone floor, with steps leading down into absolute blackness. "Guys, look," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Mark grinned, pulling a powerful flashlight from his pack. Now the real adventure begins. The steps were narrow and steep, carved directly into the bedrock. The air that wafted up was frigid and carried that strange metallic scent more strongly. We descended single file, our world shrinking to the narrow beam of Mark's light. The stairs went down far deeper than any root cellar had a right to. After what felt like an eternity, they opened into a narrow stone passageway, its walls slick with moisture and covered in the same strange symbols we had seen on the bowls. We walked for what felt like miles, the passageway sloping ever downward. The air grew colder, and a low, almost subsonic hum began to vibrate through the stones, a sound you felt in your teeth more than heard with your ears. Chloe was openly crying, begging us to turn back, but Mark was possessed by a curiosity that bordered on madness. The passage finally ended, not in a chamber, but at the edge of an impossible vista. We stood on a rocky ledge, and before us stretched a city. It was vast, a nightmarish reflection of the world above. Towers of black, glassy stone twisted towards a cavern ceiling so high it was lost in darkness, from which hung glowing phosphorescent fungi that provided a sickly bioluminescent light. Buildings, if they could be called that, were organic in shape, looking like petrified viscera or monstrous hives. Below, streets and plazas stretched into the gloom, empty and silent. We had found a city under the earth. We were paralyzed, a mixture of terror and wonder holding us captive. Then we saw the first movement. A figure shambled out from behind an obelisk. It was vaguely humanoid but stretched and wrong, its limbs too long and thin, its skin a pallid grayish white. It had no eyes, just smooth skin where they should have been. and its mouth was a wide, slack slit. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait. Then another appeared, and another. Soon, the streets below were teeming with them, these pale, sightless things. They were whispering, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. A multitude of voices blending into that horrifying hum we had felt in the tunnel. We had been seen. A collective shriek went up from the things below. Not a scream of alarm, but a sound of hunger, of dreadful welcome. They began to swarm, not just on the streets, but scaling the sheer walls of the cavern with terrifying speed, their long fingers finding purchase in the slightest imperfections. "Run!" Mark screamed, the spell broken. We turned and fled back into the passageway, our footsteps echoing madly in the confined space. The sound of skittering pursuit was close behind, a relentless tide of clicking claws and whispering voices. Jake, who was at the rear, let out a blood-curdling scream. I glanced back just in time to see a half-dozen of the creatures swarm over him, dragging him down. His screams were cut off with a wet, final sound. We didn't stop. We couldn't. We burst out of the passage into the basement of the house and scrambled up the stairs into the fading evening light. We didn't pause for breath, sprinting blindly into the woods back towards our camp. We reached the tents, our hearts hammering against our ribs, and frantically started packing, our hands shaking too much to be efficient. "We have to call for help," Chloe sobbed, fumbling for the satellite phone. She turned it on. The screen was dark. She pressed the power button again and again. Nothing. "It's dead. All the batteries, the lanterns, everything is dead." It was true. Every piece of electronics we had was completely drained of power, as if something in that underground city had sucked the energy right out of them. Then the whispers started again, filtering through the trees. They were here. They had followed us. We abandoned our camp and ran, clutching each other, completely disoriented in the deepening dark. The forest itself seemed to have turned against us. Branches clawed at our faces, roots tripped us, and the whispers came from everywhere at once. Liam stumbled and fell. By the time Mark turned to help him, pale hands had reached out from a thicket and wrapped around his ankles. He was pulled screaming into the impenetrable undergrowth. His screams faded into a gurgle. We were down to 4. The creatures were hurting us, playing with us. Sarah, in her panic, ran in a different direction, and we heard her single sharp cry echo through the trees before it was abruptly silenced. Mark, Chloe, and I kept running until we found ourselves back at the clearing, back at the house. It stood there, a dark sentinel, the only landmark we recognized. We were trapped. "Inside!" Mark yelled, pushing Chloe towards the broken door. We barricaded the door with the heavy stone table, though we knew it was futile. We huddled in the darkest corner, listening as the whispers and skittering sounds surrounded the house. They were on the roof, scratching at the walls. A pale hand slipped through a crack in the wall near Chloe. She screamed and scrambled away. Mark, in a fit of rage and terror, grabbed the ancient bronze dagger from the table and swung it at the hand. There was a sizzling sound like meat on a grill, and the creature outside let out an unearthly shriek of pain and withdrew its limb. The dagger. It hurt them. It was a fleeting hope. The main door splintered inward. A tide of pale, whispering horrors flooded into the room. Mark fought like a demon, the bronze dagger flashing, each touch causing the creatures to recoil and shriek. He managed to clear a path to the basement entrance. "Go, Alex, take her, get out of here!" he screamed at me, turning to face the horde alone. I grabbed Chloe's hand and we leapt down the basement steps just as Mark was engulfed. His final scream was a promise of vengeance and a command to survive. We didn't head for the city. We ran down the main tunnel until we found a smaller, narrower side passage. We crawled into it, a tight fissure in the rock, and kept moving, driven by pure instinct. We could hear the pursuit behind us, but the narrow passage seemed to slow them down. We crawled for hours until our knees were raw and our breath came in ragged sobs. The passage began to slope upward. A faint, beautiful sliver of moonlight appeared ahead. We pushed through a curtain of vines and fell out onto the forest floor, miles from the house, gasping the clean, night air. We were free. We clung to each other, crying with relief. We had made it. We started walking, using the moon to guide us south towards the nearest town. We had been walking for maybe an hour when Chloe stopped. She didn't make a sound. She just stopped and stood perfectly still. "Chloe," I said, my voice hoarse. She turned to look at me, and her eyes were gone. In their place was just smooth, pale skin. Her mouth opened into that familiar slack slit. "He is waiting," she whispered, in a voice that was not her own. She lunged at me. I stumbled backward, falling over a root. She was on me in an instant, her hands cold and strong around my throat. I flailed, my hand hitting a rock on the ground. I closed my fingers around it and swung with every ounce of strength I had left. It connected with her temple with a sickening crunch. Her grip loosened and she went limp. I scrambled out from under her, hyperventilating. Her body lay still. I had killed Chloe. I had killed my friend. But as I watched, her features began to change. Her skin grew paler, her limbs seemed to elongate slightly. The transformation stopped, leaving her a grotesque hybrid of the girl I knew and the thing she was becoming. I ran. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I ran until I found a road. And by some miracle, a truck driver saw me stumbling along and picked me up. I told the police everything. Of course, they didn't believe me. They found our ravaged campsite and the bodies of Jake and Sarah, their remains partially consumed. They found the house, but a cave-in had sealed the basement entrance. They found no city, no creatures. They declared it an animal attack, a tragic case of hikers getting lost and turning on each other. Mark and Liam's bodies were never found. Chloe's body disappeared from the morgue the night I identified it. I am back in my room now, writing this down. They think I'm traumatized, shell-shocked. They are not wrong. But they don't understand. The doctors say the whispers I hear are PTSD. The power outages that follow me are coincidence, but I know the truth. They are still down there, and they are patient. They have been waiting for 2,000 years. They can wait a little longer. I look at the old things sometimes, the things I took from that stone table. The clay bowl and the small bone figurine are in a box under my bed. I can feel them humming, a constant, low vibration that only I can sense. It is a connection, a thread pulled taut through the earth, linking my world to theirs. I don't sleep anymore. I just wait. I wait for the day when the whispers are no longer just in my head, but at my door. I wait for the power to go out for the last time. I write this not as a warning, but as a confession. We didn't just find them. We woke them up, and I fear I have brought a piece of them back with me. The invitation arrived not long after we tossed our graduation caps in the air. It was from Leo, the charismatic and wealthy one in our group. His family owned a vast private estate on a remote peninsula in northern Scotland, a place called the Moray Firth. The offer was irresistible: a full month in a fully stocked luxury cabin, surrounded by breathtaking, untouched wilderness. It was to be our grand finale, the six of us, before life pulled us apart. There was Leo, the ringleader, Maya, the brilliant and skeptical science major, Ben and his girlfriend Hannah, the inseparable adventurers, Noah, the quiet artist who always carried a sketchbook, and me, Daniel, the writer, the chronicler of our exploits. The journey was long, culminating in a bone-rattling drive down a private gravel road that ended at a stunning modern cabin perched on the edge of the cliffs, overlooking the churning gray North Sea. It was perfect. For the first week, we lived in a bubble of bliss. We hiked the dramatic coastal paths, built bonfires on the beach, and laughed until our sides ached. It was on one of these hikes, venturing further inland than we had before, that we found the standing stones. They were arranged in a perfect circle, hidden in a sunken glen shrouded in mist even at midday. The stones were black and slick with damp, covered in intricate, swirling Celtic knots that seemed to move if you stared at them too long. "These are Pictish," Noah whispered, his fingers hovering over the carvings. "Maybe even older. This is a significant find." Leo, ever eager for excitement, whooped and ran into the center of the circle. "It's like our own Stonehenge." As he did, a deep silence fell. The ever-present cry of the gulls vanished. The wind died. The air grew heavy and cold. In the center of the circle, the ground didn't look like earth and grass. It looked like a patch of darkness, a void. Cautiously, we approached. It was a hole, a perfectly square shaft descending into the earth, with steps carved directly into the bedrock leading down. A debate erupted. Maya was vehemently against it. "This is a burial site or a ritual site. We shouldn't be here, that air could be toxic." But Leo and Ben were already shining their lights down the staircase. It descended into impenetrable blackness. "We have to see," Ben said, his arm around Hannah, who looked nervous but excited. This could be the find of a lifetime. The pull was too strong. One by one, we began the descent. The steps were worn smooth by centuries of use, and the walls were close, pressing in on us. The air changed as we went down, growing colder and carrying a thick, briny smell, like a cavern that had been flooded by the sea for millennia. The hum started then, a low, resonant vibration that thrummed through the stone and into our bones. The staircase ended not in a chamber, but at the mouth of a vast, flooded cavern. A subterranean sea stretched out before us, its black, still water reflecting our trembling flashlight beams. Ancient stone docks, crumbling and green with slime, jutted out into the water. And beyond the docks, carved into the walls of the cavern, was a city. It was not built. It was hewn from the living rock of the cavern, a nightmarish labyrinth of windows and doors opening into darkness, of towers that twisted like coral and spires that reached down from the ceiling like stone stalactites. The architecture was all wrong. Angles that defied logic, designed for something that did not move or think like a human. The water lapped softly against the dock. Then, a ripple broke the surface. Then another. Pale, bulbous shapes broke the water. They were vaguely humanoid, but bloated and fish-like, with slick gray skin that glistened in the light. Their faces were the stuff of nightmares wide. Unblinking black eyes that covered half their faces and slack mouths lined with needle-like teeth. They began to haul themselves onto the docks, moving with a wet, dragging gait, their webbed hands, and feet slapping against the stone. They saw us. A collective guttural clicking sound echoed through the cavern, a horrifying language of clicks and groans. They began to shambolically advance, not with speed, but with an inexorable tidal certainty. We Aunixir ran. We fled back up the staircase, our screams echoing in the narrow confines. We burst out into the circle of standing stones, gasping the clean air, but the horror was not over. The clicking was following us up the stairs. We sprinted through the misty glen, back towards the coastal path and the safety of our cabin. We didn't get far. The things from below were not just in the water. They began to emerge from the sea itself, crawling up the cliffs on the slippery paths we had hiked just days before, their bodies dripping with cold salt water. They were cutting us off. We changed direction, plunging deeper into the inland forest, hoping to lose them. The forest was ancient and dense, the ground soft and boggy. Ben, trying to help Hannah over a fallen log, slipped. His leg twisted underneath him with a sickening crack. He cried out in pain, unable to stand. "Go," he screamed, at us. "Just go." Hannah refused to leave him. "I'm not leaving you," she sobbed, trying to haul him up. We all stopped, torn. The clicking was getting closer, surrounding us. Maya shone her light into the trees, and we saw them, dozens of them, moving through the mist between the gnarled trunks. "Daniel, take her," Ben yelled, shoving Hannah towards me. "Get her out of here." It was a horrific choice. Noah, pale and silent, grabbed my arm and pulled me away. Leo, after a moment's hesitation, did the same. We left them there, Hannah clinging to a crippled Ben as the pale figures closed in. Their screams were swallowed by the forest and the wet, clicking sounds. The three of us ran blindly, driven by pure terror. We had no idea where we were. The mist grew thicker, and the humming from the earth seemed to intensify, disorienting us. We stumbled into a clearing and found another structure, a low, crumbling stone hut, its roof long gone. We scrambled inside, hoping for a moment's respite. We huddled together, listening to the things moving through the trees outside. Leo was hyperventilating. We're gonna die here. We're gonna die here. No, we're not, Maya said, her voice surprisingly steady, though her hands were shaking. We wait until dawn, they might be nocturnal. But they weren't waiting. A pale hand gripped the top of the stone wall, then another. They were climbing in. Leo snapped. With a raw scream, he charged the nearest one, tackling it back out into the clearing. We heard a struggle, a wet tearing sound, and then Leo's screams were cut short. Noah and I were paralyzed. Maya grabbed a rock. "Stay behind me," she whispered, but there were too many. They flowed over the walls like a tide. One grabbed Noah, its needle teeth sinking into his shoulder. He didn't even scream, just went limp with a shocked expression. Another seized Maya, and she fought like a wildcat, smashing the rock into its face before she was dragged, kicking, into the mist. I was alone. I backed into a corner, waiting for the end. But the creatures just stood there, their black eyes fixed on me. They clicked and groaned to each other. Then as one, they turned and melted back into the forest, leaving me alone in the stone hut with the echoing silence and the terrible hum from the earth. I don't know how long I stayed there. I finally ran, driven by a primal need to escape. I found the coastal path by sheer luck and stumbled back to the cabin. I tried the satellite phone. It was dead, just a useless brick. Every electronic device in the cabin was completely drained of power. I hid for a day and a night, jumping at every sound. On the second day, I started the long walk down the gravel road. I was found by a groundskeeper who came to check on the property. I told my story. The police launched a massive search. They found the circle of standing stones. They found the shaft. But when they descended, they found only a small, flooded grotto, a dead end. They found no city, no docks. They found Ben's and Hannah's bodies, along with what was left of Leo's half buried in the bog. They said it was a tragic accident.